Hi students, this is a video series about understanding how narratives work, especially works of prose fiction. It might be relevant to other forms of storytelling, but my focus here is on literature. I'll start by answering the question, what is prose? You probably know the word prose and can recognize it when you see it, but what does the word prose mean? Prose is writing that is formatted, that has the appearance on the page of everyday language. The formatting of a story in prose does not in any way indicate that it is literature. If you see a prose page in a language you don't understand, you will have a hard time knowing if it's a novel or just any other kind of writing. In fact, the word prosaic, reminiscent of prose, the word prosaic meaning reminiscent of prose, has come to have a meaning of boring, everyday, mundane. There is nothing special, unique about the formatting of prose on the page. This indistinctness from everyday language is what defines it in contrast with verse. In fact, the term prose only really makes sense if we contrast it to verse, if we contrast prose and verse. Verse is the formatting that we associate with poetry. It means that the place where the lines are cut off matters. There is some principle to where lines end. There's a principle to where lines end. It's not just when the page ends. In classic verse, the principle is often the meter and the rhyme. You count to 5 beats and then the line ends. In free verse, there are other principle involved, but anyways, it does matter. It is important to understanding the poem, the verse poem. The point is that the place where the line ends is significant. So remember, in verse, the line ends are significant. That's why every edition of the same poem will have the same line breaks. No matter how large the page is, the line will end on the same word. In prose, by contrast, the lines end, lines, not sentences, the lines end when we run out of space on the page. Every edition of, say, Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice will have the same first sentence, but where the first line ends is up to the size of the paper and the size of the font of the letters. If you read from the computer, you can enlarge the font and then the line ends somewhere else. If you read from a tiny book, the lines will be short and end after 4 words. If you are reading from a wide book, the lines might be super long. In verse, that's not possible. Generally speaking, the lines will need to end in the same place in every edition. So the famous opening lines of Orwell's 1982 are the same work, the same quote, no matter what shape I twist them into. The same cannot be said of the work of verse. If I take William Carlos Williams, this is just to say, and smoosh it into prose, it will not feel like the same poem anymore. As a by the way, some will tell you that the opposite of prose is poetry, but that is a mistake. That's not accurate. Poetry is much more amorphous a concept than verse. There can be prose poems, and you can talk about a landscape as poetic. Verse, on the other hand, is mostly about how the text looks on the page and sounds to when you speak it. It's about the structure and form. Some plays, like Greek tragedies, are presented in verse, but that does not make them poems. Some plays, like Shakespeare's, mix verse and prose. You can tell the difference not by how poetic they sound, but through how they look on the page. So, to reiterate, A work in prose is one that is formatted on the page and read out loud as if spoken like everyday uses of language. It contrasts with verse in that the place where the lines end does not matter. You can say that anything we write and read, phone DMs, essays for school, newspaper articles, are in prose. However, we usually only bother to mention the fact that it is in prose when there's a possibility that something might be in verse. Literature was once ruled by verse. There was a time when almost anything considered literature would be in verse. That's why you will usually hear the word prose in the context of literature to say, no, this is not verse, this is prose. I hope this helps. If you think I took something simple and made it more complicated, well, sometimes that's my job too. Thank you for listening.